On Exploring North Carolina, we've shown you mountain forest, coastal hardwood bottoms, wildflowers, and wild fruits. What do all of these have in common? They came from seed. Most of us don't think about seeds, but they are part of our lives every day. Think corn on the cob, green peas, lima beans, bird seed, popcorn. And for most adults, what would life be like without coffee beans? The phenomenal world of seeds includes all of these things, and all of the grains, nuts, berries, and acorns in our fields and forest. Each of us has heard the phrase, "gone to seed," to describe an overgrown yard or field. For Exploring North Carolina, gone to seed is a good thing because it means the continuation of life and the production of natural and agricultural foods. Today, the world of seed is going to come alive with the help of 3 experts. We'll visit with my old friend, Jessie Perry, an extraordinary naturalist at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, Dr. Claudia Joles, professor and plant ecologist at East Carolina University, and Dr. Chris Moorman, coordinator of fish and wildlife sciences at North Carolina State University. The first question of the day, what is a seed? Jessie Perry and Claudia Joles offered answers.
Most plants that you commonly see around in the environment, trees, flowers, shrubs, and so on, reproduce by means of seeds. Plants are in an arms race with insects, with herbivores, with diseases, with each other. They have to be able to change. And when seeds are produced, they're not identical to the parents or each other. It's a way of plants getting new combinations of genes so that they can continue on in this arms race of competition and avoid being eaten, grow taller and faster than the plants around them, and get to the sunshine. So this is one of the reasons that we have seeds and why it's important for plants to reproduce sexually. In the words of Dr. Frank Blazich, a professor of horticulture at NC State University, a seed is a little plant in a box with food. And I love that succinct definition. There is a tiny little plant in a seed. It's an embryo, but it has an upper part which will become the leaves and a lower part which will become the root system. And it also has nourishment. That's the food. And it can be either in a specialized structure called endosperm or in the 2 seed leaves of the plant. Most of you have probably seen a bean seed sprout, and the first 2 leaves are round and chubby, and they're the ones that contain the energy that the original plant put there, the parent plant put there, to get the little seed going. So those are full of energy. That's why we eat beans. They've got protein, they've got starch, they've got some oils, and that's all food meant for the little germinating plant. There's also the box, and that's a seed coat. Often it's very hard, impermeable, helps prevent the seed from getting injured. You have some that are very thick, like a hickory shell, some that aren't. It also can protect the seed from germinating at a bad time, for instance, right before winter. So there we have it, the little plant, the food, and the box.
Well, a seed is the plant's new offspring, but it's provisioned offspring. It's not just released willy-nilly into the environment. The seed also has food reserves and protective reserves as well, what we call often endosperm and the seed coat. And often that seed is also surrounded by other parts of the parent plant in which we would call it a fruit, and there's more protection involved there too.
Why do seeds come in so many sizes?
There's tremendous variation in seed size, and the $64,000 question is why. You can go to any habitat on this planet and there'll probably be, from plant species to plant species, about 10,000-fold differences in seed size. Some seeds are large because they're well provisioned, either with food reserves or water or protective coverings. Very often these large seeds are things that are going to be dispersed in place or perhaps by animals. Smaller seeds, as you might suspect, are not so well provisioned. They might just be the new offspring, and often other types of dispersers like wind are going to play a role there. But as far as what is responsible for all this variation, it's just another one of those wonderful evolutionary mysteries.
Large seeds are common in plants that grow in highly competitive areas, in the forest, that sort of thing, where the seedlings may not have much access to light initially. They have a lot of nourishment, a lot of energy, and they get that plant off to a great start. A walnut, for instance, will put down a deep taproot and a nice size upper part just based on the energy from the seed alone. Then they can sit there for years waiting for a light gap to happen. If a tree falls over, a hurricane blows a tree over and light hits that little seedling, it'll then take off. But it can sit there suppressed for years. But that big seed helps it get going and get established initially. Now, why would a seed be small? When you get down to a tiny little seed, a squirrel isn't going to bother with that. So it may cut down on the range of large predators that are going to hunt for a tiny seed. Now, a seed could be very small too, to get it to float in the air.
Birds were given wings, fish fins, and land mammals feet that enable them to move as they feed and react to their environment. But how do plants move?
Seeds serve another important function besides being just the reproductive part of the plant. They also serve as a means for plants to move through the environment over time. Now, an individual tree obviously can't pick up and walk, but its seeds can move, sometimes miles. Why would plants want to move their seeds around? Well, a lot of times, right underneath the parent plant is not a good place for a little plant to grow. If you ever look at a pine forest, for instance, you can go in there, thousands of loblolly pines, and you walk under there and millions of seeds hit the ground every year, but the little loblolly pine seedlings need light, and they can't grow in the shade of their own parents. So they have to get out from under mom and dad and find a new place in the sun to start. Also, thinking geologically, as the climate changes, the seeds are plants' methods to move along with climate change. If it starts to get a lot colder, plants from the north will be dispersed gradually south. Whatever seed dispersal mechanism they have will disperse them probably equally north and south. But if it gets colder, the ones that land far south will go ahead and live. They'll have a competitive advantage because of the increasing cold over those that live in a warmer area. So this explains why plants have been moving up and down the coast with each ice age for thousands and thousands of years. So it enables the plants to get out of the way of climate change.
Nature has equipped seeds with ingenious ways to travel, to leave their parent plants, and find fertile ground.
The most dynamic types of seeds that are dispersed are things that are dispersed by other agents or other vectors. So we have wind dispersed seeds, the helicopters of some of the maples, the parachutes of the dandelions and the milkweeds. We also have water as a dispersal agent. So you might see these seeds being larger and full of air sacs or other tissues that help them float. There are animal dispersed seeds, and there are also explosively dispersed seeds.
If you haven't ever gone out and touched a ripe seed capsule of speckled touch-me-not, you're in for a treat. So if you gently take the very end of the seed pod between your thumb and index finger and just gently squeeze it, it'll pop and the seeds will go flying out.
Of all these dispersal methods, the most common is dispersal by wind.
Plants have various adaptations to help the wind lift up and carry the seeds off. away from the parents into a hopefully new and better environment. One of these is wings. Seeds have adapted little flattened flanges that stick out from them. And it's interesting, pines, an ancient group of plants, and maples, a more recent group of plants, have hit on the same structural mechanism for making their seeds helicopter. If you throw a pine seed or a maple seed up in the air, it will spin around, and this keeps it aloft for a much longer time than if it just drops straight down. Another type of adaptation for wind dispersal are hairs, or little structures that form what looks like a parachute. You may have looked at a dandelion seed, and it looks like it's sitting under an umbrella, the little seed hanging there from a miniature parachute. Other things like milkweeds have all these hairs sticking out from them, which catch the wind and take them off. Being tiny is another way that seeds can get blown around easily by the wind. Plants like orchids and mountain laurel have very tiny, almost dust-like seeds.
I wanted to know how many dust-sized seeds a plant like an orchid can produce. Dr. Joles had the answer.
The orchids are distinctive and have some of the smallest seeds on the planet. Some estimates put in a single fruit of an orchid there may be over 3 million seeds. They're just tiny like dust. And here the plant strategy is more, that by producing more seeds there's a trade-off with seed size. So in order to produce millions of seeds, those seeds have to be smaller.
For many people, the most interesting mode of seed dispersal is by animals. Few people know more about the role of birds, mammals, and reptiles as seed dispensers than North Carolina State University's Chris Moorman.
There are three primary seed dispersal strategies that involve animals. The first strategy is one that most people are most familiar with, and it's the old squirrel burying the nut strategy. Oftentimes animals like squirrels or jays or crows will collect acorns and other nuts, and they will carry them off to cache them to be used later in the year, maybe in the winter during the harsher months. They may bury them in the ground, as people are familiar with squirrels doing. Squirrels go back and find those nuts later in the season, but sometimes they don't find the nuts. They forget about them or they don't relocate them. And in that case, the following growing season, those nuts or acorns will germinate to make a new tree. The second strategy that a lot of people are familiar with is what I refer to as the hitchhiker strategy. Many of us go out in the woods, a lot of times we come home with seeds stuck to our legs. Well, this same phenomenon happens to animals as they move through the woods. Plants like beggar lice, tick seed, or cockleburl will grab hold of the fur of those animals and hitch a ride. And eventually those seeds will fall off and germinate, and then the plant's establish itself somewhere else. The third seed dispersal strategy that involves animals is what I call the ingestion strategy. The fleshy fruit's available to the animals eat that fruit. The fleshy part actually is a reward to the animal because it has nutritional value, and in turn the plant gets its seed dispersed as the animal travels away and either regurgitates that seed or defecates it on the ground.
Both Jessie Perry and Claudia Joles offered great examples of animals as movers of seed.
Charles Darwin was very interested in how plants were dispersed around the planet, and he did a lot of investigation of mud that was attached to the feet of ducks. And he would hunt these ducks and get the mud off and then germinate. And he got many, many different types of plants. So this would be kind of a passive way of being transported by animals. You may have seen a fence line coming up with red cedars, wild cherries, and that sort of thing. And that's because birds have sat on that fence line and deposited those seeds right along the fence. Some plants have fruits that appeal to birds. These are usually small berries. Others, like the pawpaw and the persimmon, plums, have fruits that appeal to larger animals, like raccoons, foxes, possums, and so on.
So the herpetofauna is also included in plant reproductions. And in fact, it was about probably 30 years ago that it was first reported that the eastern box turtle was seen consuming fruits of this wonderful woodland ephemeral mayapple, and then defecating its seeds, and these defecated seeds that had passed through the gut of the eastern box turtle actually had higher germination rates than anything the researchers could do. Recent reports have suggested that there are as many as 7 different species that have been found in the species of box turtle. Hackberry, our local robust weed, pokeweed, or what people call poke or pokeberry. American sycamore seeds have been found in turtle excrement. So there's a lot going on inside a turtle.
One of the most interesting symbiotic relationships between plants and animals involves the lowly ant. Jesse Perry had the story.
Now there are some plants, especially small forest plants, little wildflowers like wild ginger, violets, that have made a partnership with ants. They don't have fruit on their seed, but they have a little structure called an elaiosome, which has a lot of oil in it, which the ants love. And the plants will drop their seeds on the ground. The ants will come by, pick up the seed and the elaiosome, carry them away to the nest where they'll eat the elaiosome, and the seed is usually too hard for them to crack, and so they'll take it and put it in their waste pile or in an underground waste storeroom. In either case, it moves the seed around away from the original parent plant. This is called myrmecockery, or ant farming, literally. So plants have made deals with all kinds of animals to get their seeds moved around the environment.
While considering animals as seed dispensers, what have we learned from observing these animal-seed interactions?
Things like beggars, ticks, and burdocks have tiny little hooks, and in the case of burdocks, this inspired Velcro.
Finally, a few plants require an unlikely ally before seeds can be released to grow.
We call it serotiny in the plant world. So there are fruits that open in response to what we believe to be heat. So we have serotinous cones or pines, Table Mountain pine of the western mountains. Here locally we have pond pine, Pinus serotina, so named because it takes heat to release those woody bracts and allow those seeds to disperse.
Given the right conditions, most seeds will germinate after a few weeks or a few months of dormancy. Some seeds, however, are capable of lying dormant centuries before sprouting.
We like to think of dormancy as dispersal in time. So here, the plant strategy is to escape an unfavorable environment by simply waiting it out rather than trying to seek it out through space. Some of the most distinctive features of long-lived seeds are a lotus was found in some Chinese ruins, and it was over 1,300 years old. There was a date palm seed that was found in ruins of Jerusalem that they've dated to 2,000 years ago, and workers in Jerusalem have successfully germinated a 2,000-year-old date seed.
It must be emphasized that many animals simply would not survive without seeds in their diet.
Birds tend to eat their fruits whole, which means they primarily eat only small fruits like Virginia creeper, dogwood, foxgrape, and poison ivy. Yes, poison ivy. Birds love poison ivy fruit. It's one of their favorites in the late fall. They eat the fruits, they fly somewhere else, your backyard, they defecate the seed out, and then you've got a poison ivy plant growing in your backyard. Because larger fruits are too big for birds to consume, they tend to depend more on mammals for dispersal of their seeds. Many of us have seen a pile of dark seeds, looks a little bit like pumpkin seeds to me, laying on a path or a woods trail. That's persimmon. That's persimmon seed. And as we all know, persimmon is a great plant for people to eat, and foxes, raccoons, deer, and other mammals love to eat it as well. Plants attract birds as seed dispersers by color. So birds are drawn to the colors red, purple, black. Plants like dogwood, pokeweed, foxgrape, and hollies like American holly or winterberry or deciduous holly have those fruits that are red or purple.
Of all the many kinds of berries, fruits, and nuts, seeds in the wild, is there one that stands out as a critical animal food?
I would argue that acorns are the most important food source for animals in North Carolina. They're eaten by deer, white-tailed deer, black bear, wild turkey, gray squirrel, and numerous other animals across the state. They're especially important in the southern Appalachians where food diversity can be low at times. In some years, oak trees produce abundant acorn crops. In others, they produce low numbers of acorns. We call those mass crop failures. In years when there are mass crop failures, animals have to find alternative food sources. I call those buffer foods. Those alternative foods may include hickory nuts. They may include fleshy fruits with seeds in them, like dogwood.
Does an abundance of acorns and other mast foods help us to predict a mild or harsh winter? Claudia Joel's unraveled this old weather myth.
Well, I'm not about to argue with folklore because it's been around a lot longer than I have, but I wouldn't think that numbers of seeds can predict the coming winter. In fact, I might suggest that numbers of seeds might predict past summers. We often think that this masting we see in certain species is related to resources that the plant has had available, and that they may, through a series of several good growing seasons, accumulate resources from appropriate temperature, water, nutrients, and sunlight, and then hoard these resources and save them up across years to produce a bumper crop of acorns. So maybe it won't predict the winter, but it'll certainly tell you something about the past summers.
Before leaving this world of seeds, the question must be asked, is there such a thing as a bad seed?
Invasive species are invasive because by definition they know no bounds. They're here as exotics or introduced species, but they also are here negatively impacting the natives that are here. So in our forested landscape, some of the more vigorous invasive taxa, things like princess tree, which is stunningly beautiful when it flowers, but it's wicked and evil when it produces seeds. It produces tens of thousands of seeds per tree, or certainly hundreds per capsule, and they're small, wind-borne seeds. And these seeds are dispersed everywhere with fairly strong germination rates and are there established in the landscape, outcompeting our native taxa.
With any plantings, it's important to focus on native species. Native species such as our perennial wildflowers, our native warm season grasses, native shrubs such as pokeweed or beautyberry, and the native trees such as the oak trees we've mentioned before, all produce seeds that are valuable food sources for wildlife.
While exploring North Carolina, as you walk among flowers, trees, tall grasses and shrubs, be thankful they will go to seed.